Alright, the very first thing you need when making dice are molds. These will hold the shape of your dice as empty space, so you can fill the void with material that will eventually harden. The molds are made of silicon, which allow easy release of these materials. You can use polyurethane plastics, epoxy resin, or anything that starts off in a liquid form and solidifies to a hard surface. These molds all have reservoirs to hold extra material and are intended for use in pressure pots. Pressure pots can be filled with and then maintain pressurized air. As the pressure increases, any bubbles trapped in the material are reduced to a negligible size, making them virtually invisible to the naked eye. We'll need extra material to replace the space left behind by the bubbles, or else we get dice like this. To make molds, you'll need a set of master's dice. This is the shape you want your dice to have, not only their geometry, but also the depth and font of their numbers. You can 3D print them and sand them down to your preferred smoothness, or you can get someone else to do it. Not everyone has a 3D printer readily available, or has the time and space to use it in their homes. I suggest contacting other dice makers to see if you can purchase a set of their masters, or if you can get them to print your set using files that you made yourself. In the description, I'll link a video by Cly Faker, who explains how to design your own set using Blender, which, by the way, is a completely free program. Now, this set will also have some way to produce the shape of the sprues. You can drill a hole and use a toothpick. I've just 3D printed my own sprues with matching holes in the masters. Next, you'll want some pourable silicon. I'll be using Moldstar 30 from the company Smooth-On. But again, you can use anything that starts off as a liquid and then solidifies to give an elastic surface which doesn't bind to the materials you use to make dice. You need to take note of its shore strength. For silicons, it shows how easy it is to deform the mold. There are different scales to shore strength. The one we are primarily concerned with is the A scale. We usually use this for rubbers. With the Moldstar series, the number in its name shows its shore strength. If it's too low, the silicon will be too fragile. If it's too high, it'll be too difficult to remove the dice from the mold. Finally, you'll need a way to mix and pour that silicon, as well as some sort of vessel to hold it as it cures. I do, however, recommend some extra equipment, like a vacuum chamber and a mold release agent, depending on the type and quality of your molds. Speaking of, the first type of mold we have are the regular sprue molds. A sprue is just something that we can use to inject material into the mold. Again, this has the added benefit of holding extra material so that bubbles do not form in our dice. These little guys make 1 dice each, so that means 7 of them will be needed for a set. Compared to the other molds, they don't need as much equipment, they don't take as long to make, and they use much less silicon. However, you can damage your masters when making sprue molds like this. Lots of dice making techniques also need a wide surface to work with. This makes things like 2-colored dice basically impossible for this type of mold. Any raised corner present in the mold could guarantee large bubbles. This means even with pressure pots, you're left with dice like this. Now, even if you do get the mold perfect, you could still have slipping in each flap of the mold. If you cut straight lines on your mold, like I have, then you can get dice like this. I've seen sprue molds with wavy cuts, which could stop that issue. However, I have never tried that method. Instead, I had used these, the Sprue Cap Mold hybrids. It's called that because it has two parts, one part which caps the other. With this, we can use a lot of techniques that are otherwise unavailable with a regular sprue mold, while maintaining its benefit of having consistently clear dice. Again, due to its reservoir of material. We also lose any chance of bubbles forming on raised corners, because with this method, all of the uppermost faces lie flat. This design, however, has a huge flaw. It does not stop the material from flowing out the sides. Since liquid flows from the highest point down, all the extra material we have in our reservoirs just empties out the sides. If it flows out fast enough, we won't have any material left to fill in the voids left by the compressed bubbles in our pressure pot. You can actually see that here, where there is a lot of overflowed resin. You can tell that in its liquid form, the resin has flowed out the sides and solidified into these streams of resin. This leads to the final improvement, a barrier to prevent the resin from flowing out the sides. I call this the walled Sprue Cap Mold hybrid. The material cannot escape, meaning that we have all the benefits of the previous mold type without any of its flaws. As long as you completely fill the mold and its reservoir, there is no way for a bubble to form on your dice. You can build your wall into the mold like I have. You can also use tape or the vessel that you used for the mold as the wall itself. A built-in wall is guaranteed to have no leaks, while a separate wall can have leaks, especially as the mold shrinks over time. Alright, now to actually make them. I will only show the methods in making the regular sprue mold and the walled cap mold. One, because I don't have enough silicon for all three types, and two, I want to showcase the various techniques and changes I've made to the regular mold making process. If you want to see a method for making sprue cap mold hybrids, then I have linked a video from Geek Happens. The setup for sprue molds is easy. You fix your dice to your sprue and then your sprue to your vessel. Here, the connection between the sprue and the dice is tight enough to fix them together. And I'll just use some super glue to fix my sprue to the vessel, which is just this plastic shot glass. The setup for a walled cap mold is much more involved. You'll need a smaller platform and a larger container. Here I had laser cut a small box to fit within a larger box. Now, you don't have to do this. You can fashion this from cardboard or use plastic containers you have lying around. Just note that you may have to disassemble the larger container to free the mold. You'll also need a thin adhesive to fix the dice to the platform. I have this double-sided tape, which I'll use to stick the sprue face to the platform. For each dice, I first cut out a matching piece of adhesive. Then, I'll remove the cover using tweezers, and lastly, I'll position and stick them onto the platform. Now that you have everything prepped and ready, it would be a good time to use some sort of mold release to ensure that your dice do not bond to the silicon as it cures. Here, I'm using Ease Release 200. It's a product that prevents bonding between plastics and silicons. We'll also be using this later to prevent our cap from sticking to our mold, as it conveniently prevents bonding between two layers of silicon as well. Now, whenever you're working with aerosols, it's always good to have some sort of protection. Not only do we have this gas mask, but also we'll be doing this in a well-ventilated area. Following the instructions, we first apply a heavy layer of Ease Release 200 to all sides of our dice. Notice how I'm rotating the mold each and every time I spray. This step is not really necessary. However, I severely recommend you do this because it drastically increases the chance of a successful mold. Now the next step is to lightly tap each and every surface with a soft bristled brush. My guess is that this allows extra layers of ease release to apply more readily. I don't do this with the sprue mold. That's because it's too narrow for my brush to reach. Now all we have to do is apply a light coating and allow to dry for 10 minutes. Within that 10 minutes, we can start mixing our silicon. With Moldstar, make sure to mix it adequately, scraping the sides and bottom to ensure the right ratio of the two parts. Here, it's 1:1 by weight or volume. You need to be wary of the pot life of your silicon. This is the time when you can mix, degas, and pour. Anything past that, and the reaction between the two parts means that the silicon is too viscous to work with. With the silicon that we have, our pot life is 45 minutes. We mix the silicon for 5 minutes and allow it to degas in the vacuum chamber for 10 minutes. This is to get rid of bubbles. Again, this helps to create a consistently successful mold. If you don't have a vacuum chamber, just pour as slowly as possible and as high as possible. This helps to squeeze out any bubbles that might appear on the surfaces of your molds, which could appear on your dice when you come to make them. We need to wait as long as the recommended cure time. For our silicon, that is 6 hours. By this time, the molds are strong enough to remove from their containers. For your first time making a mold, I recommend waiting an excess of 24 hours. This way, you can be sure that your silicon has cured. Once you know what fully cured silicon feels like, you won't have to keep track of time. For the regular sprue version, we can free the sprue and the dice by running an X-Acto knife along the edge. Try to do it in long and smooth motions. Pull apart each flap of the mold to maintain tension, making the cutting easier. This process can make little scratches on your masters. You will definitely improve over time, but these scratches make you have to resand your masters if you want to use them in other molds. You'll need to make 2 cuts in order to free the dice. Try to cut as little as possible. The more you cut, the more flaws there may be in your mold. Now here you can actually see the cuts that I have made across the face of my master's dice. Again, you'll have to resand this if you want to use these masters in another mold. With the walled cap mold, we have to do a bunch of cleanup before it is ready to house the cap. If you had laser cut your mold vessel like I have, you'll end up with flashing. Excess silicon that has seeped in between the cuts made in laser cutting. Real easy, I'll just take out the exterior flashing with my fingers. Next, I'll remove any adhesive left on the surface of my dice with tweezers. There'll be some interior flashing as well, where silicon has seeped in between my dice and my platform. It's important to remove this flashing because it could potentially affect the quality of your cap. You can use an X-Acto knife, but I just use my fingernails. They are soft enough to not scratch the surface of my masters, meaning that I don't have to re-sand them for each mold. I'll finish off with some alcohol to remove the residue on the surfaces of my dice. It's important to get rid of each little bit of silicon, as this could potentially create cracks on the cap of our mold, making it brittle. Our cleanup is complete, so we can start attaching our sprues to our dice. I'll apply the mold release liberally as we really do not want our silicon layers to bond together. Following the instructions, we brush it down and then apply a light layer afterwards. While we're waiting for the mold release to dry, we can start mixing our silicon. You don't need as much silicon for the cap. You just need it to be tall enough for a sizable reservoir. Now again, it's important to pour the silicon as high up as possible. Once the silicon has cured, we're done. Just release the sprues, dice, and cap from the mold, and you should be ready to start making dice. Thank you very much for watching my videos, and I hope to see you soon.